Welcome to today's story, a tale of love, redemption, and the journey of a man who dared to change his entire world for a chance at true happiness. It all began with a seemingly simple bet that ended up transforming not just one life, but also touching the hearts of those around him. Be sure to watch until the end of the video and share your thoughts on whether true love can heal even the deepest wounds. Now let's dive into the story. Ethan Carter sat in his luxurious sports car, sunlight glinting off the glass windows of the towering skyscrapers. The city of New York stretched out before him, a vivid canvas of power and ambition. As the CEO of one of America's leading tech companies, Ethan was used to people looking at him with admiration and envy. He knew he had everything: wealth, fame, and a lavish lifestyle. But for Ethan, life wasn't just about achieving what others dreamed of. It was a game he always intended to win. That afternoon, Ethan and his close friends gathered at a cafe, a place they rarely frequented and only treated as a spot for casual amusement. Laughter rang out from the corner of the cafe, where the wealthy men were sharing stories of business deals and extravagant vacations. But amid the noise, Lucas, Ethan's closest friend, suddenly spoke, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Ethan," Lucas said, his voice thoughtful and slightly challenging, "I have an interesting game for you." Ethan raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. He loved bold bets, the kind that sent adrenaline rushing through his veins. "Go on," he replied, sitting up straight, ready to hear more. Lucas leaned forward, his gaze shifting toward the service counter. "Date an ordinary woman," he said, emphasizing each word. "Not one of our high society girls, but someone like her." Lucas pointed at Grace Turner, a young woman working behind the counter. Her brown hair was neatly tied back, her beautiful face and bright eyes showing signs of exhaustion, but also resilience. Grace was a single mother, working tirelessly to support her 5-year-old daughter, Mia. Ethan's eyes followed Grace, watching her offer a gentle smile to a customer, despite looking worn out. "You want me to win her over?" Ethan laughed, his voice tinged with mockery. He had conquered far more difficult challenges than impressing a woman working at a cafe. Lucas nodded, his eyes gleaming with challenge. "Exactly, but not with any fake charm, Ethan. You have to make her truly fall for you, with her whole heart." Lucas paused, then added a sweetener to the game. "If you succeed, I'll give you $2 million. Ethan leaned back in his chair, a self-satisfied smirk spreading across his lips. "It's not about the money, but I do love a challenge," he said. To him, this was a new game, an exciting thrill to break the monotony of his privileged world. Grace Turner seemed like an easy target in his eyes, and Ethan couldn't imagine anything that could truly challenge him. But as he observed Grace, he couldn't help but feel something different. Perhaps it was the gentle way she spoke to customers, or the dedication she showed to her work, even though few people seemed to notice. Ethan shook his head, brushing away those vague thoughts. This was just a game, and he would win like he always did. Ethan walked out of the cafe, already formulating a strategy to approach Grace, but his confident, arrogant steps would soon lead him into a journey he had never anticipated. A journey where money and power wouldn't guarantee an easy victory, because some challenges couldn't be measured by outward success, but by genuine emotions and profound inner change. Ethan had no idea that this bet was not only about winning over a woman, but also about rediscovering his true self, a part of him he had lost amidst the false glitz of the world he inhabited. Grace Turner knew that life wasn't a fairy tale, but a series of long days filled with endless challenges. At 28, she worked long hours at the cafe, accepting a modest wage to support herself and her 5-year-old daughter, Mia. Each day for Grace began early in the morning and ended late at night when she came home with aching hands, but a heart full of determination. No matter how tired she was, she never let Mia feel unloved or neglected, always making time to play with her before bed. Their small apartment was in an old complex where sunlight only streamed through narrow gaps between the buildings. Yet Grace had managed to turn the space into a warm and loving home, with Mia's drawings decorating the walls and shelves full of children's books that Grace read to her daughter every night. The demanding and challenging life had forged Grace into a strong and independent woman. She had no time for romance, especially not with handsome and seemingly too good to be true men. That's why when Ethan Carter entered her world, Grace remained completely unmoved. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his lips curving into a smug smile. Ethan arrived at the cafe during a busy afternoon, with Grace hurrying to make drinks behind the counter. Instead of sitting at a table, Ethan stayed at the counter, flashing his most charming smile, a smile that had captivated many. "Grace, right," he said, his eyes shining with his usual confidence. Grace looked up, her brow slightly furrowed. "Yes, sir. What drink would you like?" She wasn't impressed, and her voice held no hint of being affected by his charm. She was too accustomed to dealing with male customers who tried to flirt, and Ethan was no different in her eyes. Grace's indifference surprised Ethan. He was used to people being drawn to his looks and demeanor, but Grace didn't seem to care. She continued her work, carefully making drinks for customers. To her, Ethan was just another patron. Ethan found this more intriguing than he had expected. Grace was not an easy challenge, and that was exactly what made him even more determined to win her over. "Let's try again," he thought, already planning his next move. That afternoon, after Grace finished her shift, Ethan waited for her in the parking lot behind the cafe, where Grace usually held Mia's hand as they walked home to their apartment. Grace came out through the back door, holding her purse in one hand and Mia's small backpack slung over her shoulder. She held her daughter's hand tightly as they walked. Mia, with her golden hair and big round eyes, chattered away about the pictures she had drawn at preschool. Grace listened, smiling, her heart feeling light despite the exhaustion of the workday. Ethan approached, this time speaking in a gentler, more sincere tone. "Hello, Grace," he said, trying to sound friendly without being overbearing. Grace turned around, squinting slightly at him. Mia curiously looked at the unfamiliar man, clinging to her mother's hand. "Do you need something?" Grace asked cautiously. She didn't know Ethan, and she was always wary of strangers, especially when Mia was with her. Ethan raised his hands as if to reassure her. "I didn't mean to bother you. I just wanted to apologize if I was a nuisance earlier. I thought maybe I could take you and Mia out for dinner, if you'd be willing." Grace let out a small laugh, but it wasn't out of amusement. "I don't think so," she replied, her smile cold. "I have enough to worry about already. Have a good afternoon." With that, she gently led Mia away, leaving Ethan standing there. If you were Grace, would you agree to have dinner with Ethan? Comment happy if yes and smile if no. Ethan watched the two of them walk away, a flicker of disappointment and curiosity in his eyes. This was the first time he had been so openly rejected, and it only made him more intrigued. Grace Turner was unlike anyone he had ever met, and that made her the most captivating challenge he had ever faced. When Grace and Mia arrived at their small apartment, Grace sank into the worn-out chair in the living room. Mia ran to grab her paper and crayons, eager to continue drawing her favorite pictures. Grace sighed, rubbing her forehead, her thoughts drifting back to Ethan Carter. She was all too familiar with empty promises from men who didn't understand the life she had to face every day. She knew she couldn't let herself be swept up in illusions because Mia was the most important thing in her life. Ethan, meanwhile, had not given up. He sat in his car, feeling something different stir within him. It wasn't just the challenge that Lucas had thrown at him, but also an indescribable feeling he got when he saw the resilient look in Grace's eyes and the radiant smile of Mia. He couldn't believe that something or someone could make him feel so unsettled. Ethan decided he wasn't going to stop, but this time he knew he had to do more than just flaunt his outward charm. He would have to truly understand Grace, really step into her world if he wanted to win the trust of this strong and determined woman. Ethan Carter had never thought that one day he would be standing behind the counter of a modest cafe, wearing an apron and serving lattes and cappuccinos. But now that was his reality. To get closer to Grace Turner, Ethan had made a bold decision. He applied for a part-time job at the cafe where she worked. This wasn't just a strategy to be near Grace, it was also a chance to genuinely immerse himself in her world. Working at the cafe was far from easy, as Ethan had imagined. From learning how to make complex drinks to cleaning up tables covered in spilled coffee, he experienced a humility he had never known. Grace at first looked at him with suspicion. She couldn't understand why a polished, confident man like him would suddenly want to take on such a job. But Ethan wasn't easily discouraged. He patiently worked through it, even when he had to endure the teasing of his co-workers or the curious glances from the cafe's regular customers. One afternoon, Grace was surprised to see Ethan carefully wiping down a table, his hands, once used to signing million-dollar contracts, now tending to every last coffee spill. She couldn't help but laugh, and for the first time, Ethan saw her genuine smile. He turned around, embarrassed but happy, because he had finally made Grace smile. "Laughing at me?" Ethan teased, his eyes playful. Grace shook her head, trying to hold back her laughter. "No, it's just, I didn't think you'd last this long." Ethan laughed out loud, feeling a warmth spread through his heart. He realized that for Grace, he was willing to do anything, even things he had never imagined himself doing before. Gradually, their conversations became more natural. One afternoon, Ethan invited Grace to have a coffee, not at a fancy restaurant, but right there at the small cafe where they worked. Grace hesitated but eventually agreed, partly out of curiosity about why Ethan was putting in so much effort. They sat in a corner of the cafe, where sunlight streamed in through the large window. Mia, Grace's daughter, was playing around with small spoons at the table next to them, unaware that she had become the center of their conversation. Ethan began asking Grace about her life, not just with polite questions, but with ones that showed genuine care. Grace shared the struggles of being a single mom, the sleepless nights when Mia was sick, and the constant worries about finances. Yet she also spoke about her dreams, about wanting Mia to have a happier life, a future where the little girl could pursue anything she desired. Grace's eyes lit up with yearning and fierce love as she talked about her daughter. Ethan was speechless. This was no longer some meaningless bet. Grace wasn't a target to be conquered. She was a strong, loving, and deep person, and that touched Ethan's heart in ways he never expected. One day, Mia came to the cafe with her mother, as she often did. Ethan had prepared something special for the little girl. When Mia sat at the table, her eyes lit up as Ethan brought out a hot chocolate topped with whipped cream and colorful sprinkles. "Just for our little princess," he said, flashing a warm smile. Mia squealed with joy, her eyes sparkling like tiny stars. Grace watched the scene, and her heart softened. Ethan was doing something she couldn't ignore. Mia and Ethan began to grow unexpectedly close. Mia loved how Ethan told imaginative adventure stories, and Ethan, who had never been around children much, found joy in the simple moments of playing with her. One time, Ethan even organized a little game in the cafe, pretending to be a hero rescuing Mia from imaginary monsters. Mia's pure laughter rang out, catching the attention of everyone in the cafe. Grace, watching them, felt something shift in her heart. She was still cautious, but she couldn't deny that Ethan had done what no one else ever had. He brought simple, genuine joy into her and Mia's lives. However, not everything was easy. One late evening, as Ethan was cleaning up the cafe, Grace approached him. "Why are you doing all of this?" she asked, her eyes serious. "I don't understand. Who are you, really?" Ethan was silent for a moment, unsure of how to respond. He couldn't yet reveal the truth, that everything had started because of a bet. But now that bet no longer mattered to him. Ethan felt trapped in his own web of lies, and it hurt him deeply. "I want to understand your world," he finally said, his voice low and sincere. "I want to know who you are, and what makes you so strong." Grace continued to look at him, her expression firm but her eyes slightly softened. "I've met plenty of people who made promises," she said quietly. "They always let me down. I can't let Mia get hurt, you understand?" Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of what he was facing. But he no longer wanted to play games. He wanted to genuinely win Grace and Mia's trust and protect them. Yet he also knew that the day he would have to confess the truth was drawing near, and he wasn't sure if Grace would be able to forgive him. Thank you for following the story. Please comment "happy" below to let us know you've read this far. Ethan no longer saw Grace and Mia as part of a bet, but as a part of the future he longed for, a future built on love and sincerity. Yet before he could move forward, he had to face the chaos he himself had created. As Ethan spent more time with Grace and Mia, his life began to shift from extravagant pleasures to simple yet meaningful moments. He found joy in the little things, helping Mia with her homework, cooking simple dinners with Grace, or sitting in the afternoon sunlight listening to Grace share stories about her life. His world, once cold and empty, was now filled with the warmth that the mother and daughter brought. A bond between the three of them was forming, growing stronger each day. But deep down, Ethan was still tormented. Should he confess the truth about the bet to Grace? If she found out, would she ever forgive him? Ethan knew all too well that he couldn't bear to lose this precious relationship. Grace shared with Ethan the hardships she had faced. She and her husband used to work at a large factory in the city. "We had a simple but happy life," Grace said, her eyes heavy with sorrow. But then the factory shut down, not because it was failing, but because someone decided that closing it would be more profitable. Hundreds of people, including my family, were left unemployed. "My husband died in an accident while trying to make a living doing dangerous work," she explained, her eyes shimmering as she held back tears. Hearing Grace's words, Ethan felt his heart clench. The factory where Grace's family had worked was the same one owned by his company. He had been the one to make the decision to shut it down in order to maximize the company's profits. When he signed those documents, all he thought about were numbers and career success, never once considering the impact on the real people affected. And now the woman he had begun to love deeply was a victim of that merciless decision. Ethan knew that he couldn't continue living in deception. One day, while tidying up his office, he happened to come across an old business plan detailing the closure of the factory. Memories and a wave of guilt rushed over him, making it hard for him to breathe. The dry numbers on paper had ruined the lives of so many people, including Grace. He knew he had to confess everything, even if it meant losing everything. That evening, when Grace and Mia returned from a long day, Ethan was already waiting at the door. His face clearly showed his anxiety. "Grace, we need to talk," he said, his voice trembling. Grace looked at him, sensing that something was terribly wrong. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself, and then he told her everything. He started with the bet he had accepted, admitting that approaching Grace initially was just a challenge from his friends. Grace was stunned, her eyes widening in disbelief, but that wasn't the worst of it. "And there's one more thing," Ethan continued, his voice breaking. "I was the one who shut down the factory where you worked. It was my decision that drove your family into hardship." Grace felt like her entire world was collapsing. All the struggles, pain, and loss she had endured were now connected to the man she had begun to trust and love. Her heart felt shattered. "You did all of that?" Grace asked, her voice shaking, tears streaming down her face uncontrollably. "You approached me just because of a bet, and you destroyed my life without a second thought?" Ethan stepped forward, his voice pleading, "Grace, I'm so sorry. It's true that I approached you because of the bet, but my feelings for you are real. I love you and Mia sincerely." But Grace stepped back, clutching Mia, who was now frightened and confused. "Stay away from me," she said, her voice breaking. "You took everything from me. I trusted you, and now you've made me feel like a fool. Was I just a joke to you?" Grace picked up Mia and hurried away, leaving Ethan standing alone at the door. His heart felt heavy, weighed down by guilt and the overwhelming sense of loss. He knew he had caused an irreparable wound, and now he had to live with the loneliness and regret. Ethan returned to his luxurious mansion, but now all the wealth and power felt meaningless. The laughter of Mia and the gentle gaze of Grace were gone, leaving behind only emptiness and solitude. He realized that despite having everything, he was the ultimate loser in his own game. But the worst part was not knowing if he could ever make things right. His heart now was filled only with deep regret. Ethan couldn't stop himself from going back to look for Grace and Mia. But every time he approached the small apartment where they lived, he couldn't bring himself to go in. He would stand from a distance, silently watching the mother and daughter. Grace looked more exhausted and worn out than before, clearly throwing herself into work to forget the pain Ethan had caused. Mia was still carefree, walking happily beside her mother, but occasionally she would look up and ask, "Mommy, why are you sad?" Or, "Mommy, it's been so long since I've seen Uncle Ethan. I miss him so much." Grace would only smile, trying to hide her pain, but her eyes gave everything away. The guilt weighed heavier on Ethan with each passing day. He knew that no apology, no matter how sincere, could erase the wounds he had inflicted on Grace and so many others. If he wanted to earn back Grace's trust, he had to prove himself through actions, not just words. Ethan decided to visit the town where the factory once stood. The old roads were now desolate, the factory reduced to a heap of abandoned ruins, but the painful memories remained vivid in the hearts of the people. Ethan met with some of the former workers, people who had devoted their lives to the factory. An elderly man with rough, cracked hands from years of hard labor looked Ethan straight in the eye, his gaze full of resentment. "You're the one who shut down the factory, aren't you?" the man asked, his voice bitter. "Do you know what we lost? Do you understand?" Ethan could do nothing but nod, his heart heavy with regret. He listened to their stories, families torn apart, people forced to move away in search of work, those who had nowhere left to turn. "I know an apology isn't enough," Ethan said, his voice breaking, "but I want to make things right, to help in any way I can." A heavy silence hung over them, and he couldn't tell if his sincerity would be enough to break through the wall of anger he had caused. Ethan set up a large support fund to assist the families affected, but he knew that wasn't enough. He wanted to do more to prove his genuine remorse, so he made a decision he never thought he'd be capable of. He began to sell off the company's highly profitable tech ventures. The money he earned wasn't funneled into his personal accounts or extravagant projects, but was used to fund community-driven initiatives. Ethan chose the town where the factory had stood as the first place to launch these projects. He invested in rebuilding community infrastructure, creating new vocational training programs, and partnering with small businesses to generate employment opportunities. He wanted the town not only to recover, but to thrive in a way it never had before. Even so, Ethan still didn't feel at ease. Every night he lay awake wondering if anything he was doing could ever compensate for the pain Grace had endured. He knew he couldn't undo the past, but he was determined to do everything in his power to build a better future for Grace, Mia, and the people he had wronged. Ethan continued to return to the town, sometimes participating in community gatherings. Gradually, he began to sense a change. The angry glares were now starting to soften as people witnessed his commitment. A young woman who used to work at the factory said, "We can't forgive you right away, but at least you're doing the right thing." Ethan smiled, knowing this was just the beginning of a long journey. Not only was he trying to make amends for his mistakes, but he also felt a sense of happiness in doing meaningful work. He still found himself near Grace's small apartment, but he never had the courage to face her. Each time he saw Grace looking tired, with Mia smiling brightly beside her, his heart ached. He knew that Grace's forgiveness was something he might never receive, but he was determined to keep trying. And so Ethan continued his journey, hoping that the changes he was making would help him become someone Grace could trust again. Whether that would ever happen, only time would tell. Thank you for watching the video all the way through. You are our biggest motivation to keep creating. Let us know where you're watching from so we can see how far this video has reached around the world. Don't forget to hit like if you found it interesting and share it with your friends. Ethan stood in front of Grace's small apartment, his heart pounding with anxiety and hope. It wasn't the first time he had come here, but this time was different. Grace had agreed to see him, and Ethan knew that this opportunity was rare and fragile. He had prepared himself for any reaction from her, whether it was anger or pain, but he was ready to face it all. Grace opened the door, her eyes still cautious but no longer as cold as before. Grace had heard from people in town about Ethan, about his support and the changes he had brought to the town. Mia was overjoyed and ran to hug Ethan. "It's been so long since I saw you. I missed you so much, Uncle." Mia ran around the room laughing and playing without noticing the tension between the two adults. Ethan looked at the little girl, a faint smile appearing on his face. Mia was the light of Grace's life, and now she was also the only light keeping him from sinking into the depths of regret. Grace didn't invite him inside, but she stepped out onto the porch to talk. The two of them stood there in silence, with only Mia's laughter echoing from the small yard. Ethan took a deep breath, his eyes filled with determination, but also overflowing with emotion. "I don't know where to begin," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "I've hurt you and Mia more than anyone else, And I can't justify what I've done, but I want you to know that everything I'm doing now isn't because I want forgiveness for myself, but because I want to make right the wrongs I caused you and her." Grace listened, her eyes still filled with sorrow. "You have indirectly taken so much from me, Ethan," she replied, her voice gentle, yet full of pain. "I lost my husband, and Mia grew up without a father. That pain cannot just disappear because you feel remorseful." Ethan nodded, not avoiding Grace's gaze. "I know," he whispered. "I can't change the past, but I can change the present and the future. I've sold almost all my assets and invested in projects to help the community. I've met with the people affected and heard them speak about the losses I unknowingly caused. None of that can fully make up for it, but I hope I can start here in some way to make amends." Grace looked deep into Ethan's eyes, searching for sincerity. She saw a man who had changed, no longer the arrogant and cold CEO he once was. She saw someone willing to give up everything to do the right thing, not for honor or status, but for something greater. Yet the wounds in her heart had not healed, and that couldn't change overnight. "It still hurts," Grace admitted, her eyes welling with tears. "But maybe we can try again. For Mia. Mia loves you so much. She's already lost so much, and I don't want her to grow up missing the love she deserves." Ethan felt a glimmer of hope spark in his heart. "I promise," he said, his voice more resolute, "I will never let you down again. I will be the man you and Mia deserve in your lives, not just a good father to her, but also a friend, a partner you can trust." Grace gave a slight nod, but she couldn't hide her fear. "Ethan, I can't guarantee that everything will be perfect. I'm still scared. Scared that what you're doing might be temporary." Ethan stepped forward, maintaining just enough distance to respect her space. "I understand," he said, his eyes filled with patience. "I won't force you to believe me right away. I'll prove it every day, every moment. I'm willing to wait, willing to do whatever it takes for a second chance." They stood there in silence, and though everything wasn't completely healed, at least a door to a new beginning had been opened. Mia, unaware of what was happening, ran over and grabbed Ethan's hand. "Uncle Ethan, will you play with me?" she said with a radiant smile, and her innocent eyes brought a warmth that seeped into the hearts of the two adults. Ethan bent down gently and picked Mia up. He smiled, and for the first time in a long while, that smile was no longer filled with deceit or emptiness. "Of course, Mia," he replied, his voice full of sincerity. "I'll play with you all day if you want." Grace watched Ethan and Mia playing, her heart still lingering with fears, but there was also a glimmer of hope. She knew their journey would still be long and arduous, but she also felt that maybe they could move forward together. Maybe love and true change could soothe old wounds and bring a new future where the pain could gradually be healed over time. What do you think about Grace's decision to give Ethan a second chance? Do you agree with it? Comment 1 if you agree, and 2 if you disagree below. In the months that followed, Ethan continued to prove that he had changed, not just through words, but through his daily actions. He spent time taking Mia to school, attending her small performances at school, and even learning how to make her favorite cake. With Grace, he was always there, sharing simple but warm moments. They didn't need fancy dinners or expensive gifts, just the sincerity in every moment they shared together. Grace gradually let down the walls she had built from the pain of the past. She began to believe that Ethan had truly changed, not because of pressure or regret, but because of his love and desire to build a lasting family. Their love didn't burst forth but grew steadily from the small, consistent actions that Ethan carried out every day. Mia also began to see Ethan as a real father figure, and their small apartment became filled with laughter and warmth they had never known before. One cold Christmas evening, with snow falling gently outside the window, Ethan invited Grace and Mia to dinner at the cozy little house he had moved into. It wasn't the luxurious mansion or a grand party, but a simple meal with glowing candlelight and soft Christmas music playing in the background. They gathered together, enjoying the simple but lovingly prepared food Ethan had carefully made. Mia, dressed in warm pajamas, giggled as she opened the small gifts Ethan had chosen for her. After dinner, Ethan led Grace outside to the snow-covered park nearby. The twinkling lights reflected off the snowflakes, creating a magical scene. Ethan took Grace's hand, his eyes full of sincerity. "Grace," he began, his voice trembling, not just from the cold, but from the flood of emotions. "I've made so many mistakes in the past, but the love I have for you and Mia is the one thing that has made me a better person. You are the light that saved me from my own darkness." Grace listened, her heart racing. Ethan knelt down in the snow and pulled out a small box. "I have nothing left to prove. No grand promises beyond a lifetime of being by your side, not to fix past mistakes, but to love you and build the future we deserve. Grace, will you marry me?" Tears glistened on Grace's face, but this time, they weren't from pain. They were from happiness. She nodded slightly, her lips curving into a smile even as the tears continued to fall. "Yes, I do," she said, her voice breaking with joy. Mia stood beside them, clapping her hands and cheering, and the three of them embraced under the snowy sky, as if the world only consisted of them and the love that filled the space around them. A year later, their lives had transformed in ways no one could have imagined. Grace and Ethan held a small, simple yet deeply emotional wedding, surrounded by their closest loved ones. Mia, in her cute little dress, stood next to her parents, beaming like the spring sunshine. They had endured countless challenges to reach this day, and now they were beginning a new chapter of their lives, with a love and faith that nothing could shake. A few months later, they welcomed a new member into their family. Mia was excited to become a big sister, carefully tending to the baby and bringing laughter to the house with her playful antics. Ethan, who once lived a life driven solely by profit and material success, now felt complete as he held his wife and children in his arms. He understood that true wealth wasn't measured by money or power, but by the love and warmth of those who mattered most. They had completed a journey from loss and regret, overcoming misunderstandings and pain, to finally finding a true family. A family reborn from brokenness, stronger, happier, and always looking to the future with hope. Thank you for following the story about love, forgiveness, and the extraordinary power of change. Do you think Grace was right to give Ethan a second chance? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you won't miss more touching stories. See you next time, and remember to cherish the truly meaningful moments in life.